You just let me know when you're ready and I'll start clicking them around.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, so this is going to be my project on a history of sex work and feminism. And then you can go to the next slide. Yeah, as I said before, the disclaimer, it speaks on sensitive topics such as sex work, prostitution, and stripping. So if you are uncomfortable, just let Mr. Level know.
Please.
Okay, I'm gonna get started. You can go ahead and click to the next slide. This is just like a general overview of what I'm gonna go over today. History of sex work and feminism, current sex workers, interviews, and then our final takeaway. But I'm gonna be reading off of my laptop and kind of going through an analysis, so yeah. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so in today's society, sex work is extremely frowned upon in America. There is a large societal stigma attached to it that puts women down. Through my close friendships with sex workers, I have learned that a majority of people believe that this occupation is demeaning, trashy, wrong, and conniving. By being connected to this industry, I have found that this line of work can bring about feelings of shame, dishonor, and even disgust for clients. On the other end, I've also gained the understanding of the loving, tight-knit community, noticed an increase in my friends' self-confidence, and seen that this career has brought many opportunities into their lives. Unfortunately, this is a profession that is often hidden and not discussed, further perpetuating the shame that sex workers feel. According to dictionary.com, sex work can be defined as the sex industry or work in this industry, including prostitution, pornography, stripping, or pornographic modeling intended to sexually arouse clients. And that's just the actual definition of it. If we take a look back into history, sex work is one of the oldest living professions. Through the years, it has been one of the factors that hinders and assists feminism rise in society. Not only has it brought about different sports that women and men can enjoy today, but it is also an invaluable service that provides comfort, therapy, and entertainment for people who may feel unwanted in their own lives. On the darker side of things, sex work can be a gate to sex trafficking, drugs, and crime. To grasp a deeper understanding of sex work and feminism in the U.S., one must look at the history, interviews from current sex workers, and their perception of the stigma and the pros/cons that the profession can have. So this slide is just going over a little bit of the definition and a history, which I'm going to talk about further in this next paragraph. According to a website, Haaretz, a site that is an online newspaper in Israel, they discuss a brief history of prostitution, stating that in ancient Greece, the enterprise was accepted, legal, and sometimes even taxed. The article goes on to describe that there was an Athenian lawmaker who noticed that prostitution brought about many economic benefits. Subsequently, this lawmaker established the very first brothels. These brothels were meant to be taxed and democratized. These public brothels founded solutions to some of the problems they were experiencing, which included men being rough with the women, leading to implementing rules that patrons must follow. If they did not follow these rules, it was punishable by fines, corporal punishment, and even death. From the beginnings of prostitution, one can see where the stigma began. It is said that in ancient Greece, there was a certain vocabulary used to refer to sex workers. The article continues on saying terms such as ground beater, streetwalker, one oval, or polluted one, reflecting the material nature of the prostitute-client relationship, their low price and accessibility, and of course the low regards towards them. This shows that there's been a stigma attached to this profession throughout history. It is interesting that the only reason this profession exists is because of men's lust and need for women. One would think that if they wanted these services so badly, society would be more respectful of sex workers. Usually if one wants some type of good and services, it is common to hold that item or service in high regard. This profession seems to promote the opposite reaction. In a way, I believe this stemmed from women being inherently looked down upon and seen as less than. So no matter if the services provided by women were highly sought after, society was used to demoralizing women and taking them for granted. I think we can go to the next slide now, please. Yeah. Thank you. Seeing how women throughout history have been seen as less than, one can understand why some feminists see sex work as being at the mercy of man, still giving in to what men want and continuing a profession that disrespected women for so long. From my high school history class, I learned about feminism and that the fight for women's rights began with the suffrage movement in 1848 at the Women's Right Convention in New York. This brought about the beginning of many changes involving what women were allowed to do. Before 1848, women struggled with not being allowed to own anything for themselves and were at the mercy of men. They were mainly expected to care for household duties, abstain from education, and be completely reliant on their husband. This left women who did not have husbands struggle to find ways to survive. This is where sex work would come into play and allow women the opportunity to have some sort of financial independence and increase their opportunities. According to an article titled Prostitution in America on the website Oxford, a site that contains Oxford University Press, prostitution became popular during war times when men were far from their families, craved morale boost, and the comfort of a woman. This in turn provided a large prospect of customers for women involved in prostitution who relied on this field of work as a means to survive. The article goes on to explain that these women turned to prostitution on a casual or steady basis as a survival strategy in a sex-segregated labor market that paid women perilously low wages or in response to family disruptions such as paternal or spousal abandonment. As feminism began to grow in response to the inequalities women had faced for years, there was contradicting opinions for feminist view on sex work. As stated earlier, the opposing side had some feminists who deemed sex work as giving into the patriarchy, which further works to put women down and not see them as equals, when other feminists strive to legalize prostitution as it looked at empowering and gives women control over their bodies. It is a conflicting argument where both sides have valid points. By understanding that sex work can be empowering and grants women financial opportunities they otherwise might not have, one can see why choosing this profession provided a financial safety net for women. As women's rights were implemented with a growing civilization, the opportunities that women had to become independent heavily expanded. Although women are presented with more opportunities, sex work is still a prevalent profession. Through my connections, I have seen that some reasons for choosing this profession include women paying for schooling without the stress of debt, having the financial freedom to start a business, or simply the ability to provide for their children without having to struggle as much. You can go to the next slide now. Thank you. In today's American society, there are many different types of sex work, especially with the invention of the internet, strip clubs, countless online platforms, and even brothels. Surprisingly, in Nevada, there are still legal brothels. On Instagram, there's this woman who talks about her career as a manager of a legal brothel in Nevada. In her videos posted, she explains that this is the only state in the US where prostitution is legal, as well as stating how these brothels allow women to work in a safe environment, free from the abuse, and helps dispel many fears that can come along with illegal prostitution in the streets. As stated earlier, the definition of sex work also includes stripping. Through having a roommate who dances at a club and knowing many friends who are dancers, I've learned that strip clubs are a form of sex work without the sex. Yes, it still happens in some clubs, but most clubs have dancers sign a contract prohibiting prostitution, and it is heavily monitored. With sexual commercialization, these careers will always be a commodity. In an anonymous interview from a current sex worker, she explains that in the past 100 years, there was a stark difference between exotic dancing and prostitution. Unfortunately, as time went on, these lines have become blurred as people crave more from dancers, and the societal stigma helped propagate these once differences into the same category. She also states that the industry has become oversaturated and is now losing its value. For this project, I was fortunate enough to speak directly to 3 anonymous sources who are currently exotic dancers, also known as sex workers, as well as 1 strip club manager to obtain another perspective of working in the club in a different position. From these interviews, I gathered an array. Will you go to the next slide? I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah. From these interviews, I gathered an array of perspectives that includes the pros and cons of sex work, including dangerous situations, the opportunities for different successes, and the negatives and positives that working in the clubs have brought into their lives. Since these interviews were anonymous, I'll refer to the individual answers as interview 1, 2, 3, and manager interview. A super interesting fact I found during my manager interview was that he claimed to also be a sex worker. Really threw me Although he worked as a manager, bouncer, and a DJ in the club throughout his time, he states, "I view myself as a sex worker because in a way I am selling my body too. By protecting the women I work with, I have gotten in countless fights with customers. It is almost the same as a construction worker. They work long, laborious jobs, so in a way they also sell their body." This definitely caught me off guard, but the way he explained it is proven true. Any job that is laborious is a way of using your body to make money, whether it be construction, healthcare, or even stripping. The common theme with these interviews was everyone's outlook on the one major pro of becoming a sex worker was the money. However, this was a double-edged sword because the manager interview in interview 3 included that it is a trap that is so hard to leave and get a normal job because the money will never be the same. That is why it's so important to not use this job as a career but as a stepping stone, a tool to climb to higher places and use that money to one's best advantage. Since this is such an independent profession, one of the biggest hurdles these exotic dancers have to face is the ability to manage themselves with their money. This also includes the obstacle of being able to make the best decisions for their safety. In this profession, the atmosphere is a party atmosphere that includes drugs, drinking, money, and sex. To be able to maintain a strong mentality, as according to interview 2 and 3, is one of the hardest things to be able to do on a consistent basis. Another thing I found that was common with these interviews was the camaraderie that these women have experienced. Although they are independent contractors and do not work as a team, all interviewees have said that they found long-lasting friendships and women empowerment through this line of work. In such a potentially dangerous environment, it's important that these women look out for one another. Contrary to the answers I received from dancers, during my manager interview, he said that sometimes these women can look out for each other in negative ways. This includes girls not telling management when they are aware that one of them is doing something illegal in the club, like prostitution or drugs. A big question I wanted to ask for the manager interview was, what are some of the negatives that dancers can be exposed to in this industry? Through this answer, I got an unexpected response in relation to where this question ended up leading to. He said, "Unfortunately, the stereotypes that are heard about strip clubs proved to be true. This surprised me because the dancers I am close with have told me that they try very hard not to allow themselves to give into the stereotypes that are found within this industry, such as the drugs and prostitution. Although it seems to ring true, especially if it is only a small group perpetuating these stereotypes further." Go to the next slide. Through ancient Greece, brothels in the US, women's right in the entertainment era facilitating into what we experience today, sex work has been prevalent throughout. Feminism has fought a hard battle and won women's rights rather recently, which played a role into how sex work is viewed. Though times have changed, it's important to not hide this profession, as it will most likely always be around. Therefore, when looking at sex work as a profession and the stigma against it, it is crucial to look at the history. By looking at the history, it is easy to see why there is such a stigma attached to it. Also, by speaking to current sex workers, it gives an insight into why the stigma may still be around today. A true, extensive perception of sex work is grasped when putting both the history and today's workers into view, and it shows how feminism is represented both negatively and positively. You go to the next slide. Okay, so this is my works cited. I'm gonna be posting the interviews on YouTube, but I'm still trying to get my closed captioning together, so that will be up shortly. Yeah, and then just the last slide is the one after this is if anybody has any questions. Questions, thoughts, concerns.
Do you think that sex work has had an overall more positive or more negative impact on feminism throughout history?
It's hard to say.
I
Because
guess I should rephrase it. Do you think it's had a progressive impact on feminism?
a progressive impact on
Yeah.
feminism? Yeah. I mean, through my research, I found that, like, with the invention of the internet and sex work being involved in so many different aspects now, like the internet, strip clubs, not only prostitution, like back in the old days, there's so many different jobs. I think that it has brought about like a body empowerment movement in a way, and especially I noticed that a lot of pole studios are open, and people really enjoy doing pole sport, which came from stripping. So I think that link is a progression, and I think that it kind of all ties together, like feminism, body empowerment, sex work as a whole. Did that answer that?
No, okay. I came up with that question because I have also seen articles talking about how sex work has impacted the fashion industry as well.
Yeah.
So I thought it might also tie into like feminism and how
Yeah.
it's progressed over the
Yeah,
years.
for sure. Cool. Thank you.
I think you have a very insightful perspective on sex work in general. A lot of people have a very generalized opinion about it, whether it's positive or negative. And
Yeah.
I think that you've given a lot of insight to it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I feel like it's not talked about a lot either. So the main stigma that is attached to it is the same thing that people have been talking about for years and years. So to bring up different perspectives in the interviews was really important. It was really cool to see that different outlook. Any more questions? Yes.
Inside of the writing that you were reading from here,
Yeah.
you mentioned things involving the manager, but it was difficult to tell some of the references of the other people that you interviewed. I'm assuming inside of that essay, it's a lot easier to tell. what
Yeah.
those people are.
Yeah, I have
No
my
worries, no worries.
in-text citations,
Yeah, sure.
so it's a little bit easier. Sorry, I should have, the way I spoke, it should have
No, it's
been a
okay.
little
You did
more
great.
clear.
You did great. I was just making sure.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I was just curious about
Yeah.
making sure.
Alrighty guys, well I'm gonna turn this little camera off. Thank you guys for listening.